Hey gang, welcome to the Gill Athletics Connections podcast, the show that brings you the men and women of track and field and explores their unique stories. This show is brought to you by Gill Athletics. Head on over to gillathletics.com to find all your track and field equipment needs. I'm your host, Mike Cunningham, National Sales Manager for Gill. This week, oh man, I can't tell you how special this week is. This is special. So what we're doing today, this is part one of a three-part series with, well, you've already seen the title, so spoiler alert, Harry Marra. If you know Harry at all, famed Decathlon multis coach, most recently known for Ashton Eaton and his wife, Brianne Thyssen Eaton, and has just done a phenomenal job. So we're going to do three parts with him. We couldn't just do one. He's too special, right? So part one today, we're going to explore Harry's coaching life. So we're going to talk from how he got into track and field, growing up in New York, how he got to California, and then back to the East Coast and then back to the West Coast. You'll just enjoy this story. So today is about coaching career up until Oregon. We're going to stop there, and then part two and part three we're going to do in the next two episodes. You're going to want to check those out as well. So you know what? I'm done talking. Without further ado, please help me welcome the wise, the wonderful Harry Marra.
Hello.
Hey, Harry.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm just teaching a guy that I revere, coaching track and field, how to use an iPhone and the Anchor app.
Hey, you know what? You could climb Mount Everest a lot easier than teaching me that.
Harry, thank you so much for joining us today on the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. We've got something real special going on here. This will be our first of three parts with esteemed, legendary, I don't even want to say the myth, the legend, because it is not a myth. It's a real person here. This is amazing. Going to get some time to explore Harry Marra. In today's podcast, we're going to focus on Harry's coaching career. He's best known in today's world as coach of Ashton Eaton and Brianne and his wife Brianne, and some amazing decathletes throughout the time. So I thought we would take some time and learn about Ashton, and let's find out how he came into what we know of him as today. So, Harry, why don't we start with, let's go back. You've been involved in track and field for 60 years now. Let's go back to when you first got into track and field. What were you, a sprinter, a pole vaulter? What kind of athlete were you?
Well, I don't know. I guess I was a pole vaulter, you would say.
Okay.
My initial, not formal, organized, but my initial aspect into track and field was in the Boy Scouts. We went on a camping trip some spring weekend. I can't remember when. And we woke up Saturday morning, Friday, Saturday night. We were camping out, a whole bunch of other troops. And they said Saturday morning, you have to pick something physical and do it. So I broke down the tent that we were staying in. It was an old wall tent. It had a big pole with a spike in it. Mm-hmm. And it was a two-part pole, so I taped it together so it wouldn't fall apart. I put a string between two trees. I ran down, stuck this spike in the ground, and jumped over the string. I said, I'm a pole vaulter.
Now, did you watch track and field, or how did you know to do pole vaulting like this?
Pole vault? And this is people may not believe it, but this is a true story. I was sitting down, I don't know, I grew up in the 50s as a kid. I was born in the 40s. So I grew up in the 50s, and the first guy, everybody thinks it was Caitlyn Jenner that was the first person on Wheaties, but it was really Bob Richards, who won the games in the pole vault in 52 and 56. He was, at that time, the only two-time gold medalist. So I'm eating my Wheaties one morning, and I see his picture on the box, and he's throwing a discus. Got a picture of him throwing a discus, pole vaulting, climbing a rope, and all that. And I kind of got interested in the pole vault, just looking at that. Then there was a couple TV commercials with him on it. So that's kind of where I probably got the idea in the Boy Scouts. Bob Richards.
That's interesting that we owe this to, we say Bob Richards, but take it down a little bit more simplistically to a box of Wheaties. Thank goodness you weren't a Fruit Loops guy or something.
Oh, I like those too.
So that's funny. That's awesome. I love the ingenuity of just 2 tent poles and a string across the trees and let it rip and roar.
Yeah, it was great. And then from that, I probably was, I don't know, I'm saying sixth or seventh grade at that time. And then a couple other things happened. You play tag when you're in grade school at lunchtime. You do all kinds of sports and whatever. So when I was playing tag, I was pretty quick and I didn't get caught much. Dart and dash and stuff. So in eighth grade, I remember I said, I'm going away to high school and off to high school. And I said, maybe I'll try this track and field thing. And so that kind of pushed me in that direction.
And where are we at this time? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in upstate New York, a little town called Cohoes. It was probably 10,000 people, a very blue-collar town. And I was really lucky. I grew up on a street where there were about 5, 6 other kids my age, guys. And then we had a gang of people not a gang, but in today's world, but a group of guys that maybe there were 12 to 14 of us that hung out. And Mike, when that school bell rang at 2:30 in the afternoon, we were in the streets playing everything. We made up sports. We played all the sports. So there was always somebody around to be active with, and sports were a big thing during the 50s for us. The only rule we had was get in when the street lights go on at 5:30 or something.
Oh, yeah. As I say, forgive me, but I'm getting a Little Rascals theme going.
Yeah, it was. I used to watch those in the morning.
That was a good show. I missed that show, actually. So, on into high school and continue doing track and any other sports?
I did. I got to high school. I went to Christian Brothers Academy down in Albany. It was about 10 miles away from Cohoes. And my whole career in track and field, starting from that moment right on through, I've been a very, very fortunate person. I've met great mentors and people that have guided me along the way and helped me along the way that, and I'm looking back on almost 60 years in the sport. I couldn't have done it without them. So anyway, I get to high school. I'm pretty quick out of grade school, right? So I'm feeling, it's okay, but not good enough to make the varsity. So I'm on the freshman team. Okay. And that's fine. So one day I'm on the track, a little cinder track, and doing what we used to call back then wind sprints. You sprint 100 and you walk back or half walk back, half jog back, and do it again. And the varsity coach comes by. Well, you're a little freshman, and the varsity coach talks to you. Holy cow.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
Huge deal. And plus your knees are rattling, because you're And this guy always called every one of his athletes by first and second names. And he said, "Hey, Harry Marra, what are you doing?" I said, "Coach, I'm doing wind sprints." He goes, "You're doing those all wrong." And I think to myself, wait a minute. I was the fastest guy at St. Agnes School in 8th grade last year. What's up with this? And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? He said, you're running on your toes. You're sprinting on your toes. He said, land on the ball of your foot. Make sure as you pass over, your heel hits the ground. This is 1961. 1961. This guy's telling me this in upstate New York. Make sure your heel hits the ground. You'll get a stretch reflex off the gastroc and soleus, and your foot will come flying through, and you'll be faster than greased lightning. I said, all right, I'll try it. You're the varsity coach, knows what's going on. I did it, and I was slower than molasses.
Oops.
Holy cow, this is not fun. Well, I didn't have such a bad habit that after a couple weeks of trying it, it worked. And in today's world, that's exactly how a person should sprint. That's part of how a person should sprint. So all of a sudden, Cliff Lehman, who was my coach in high school, phenomenal coach. He was a great athlete out of the University of New Hampshire, football and track and field. And in track and field, he did multiple events. So I was very fortunate, to have him as my coach for the last 3 years, sophomore, junior, senior year. So it was great. That was great. That's where it started in 1961 at Christian Brothers Academy in Albany, New York.
It's interesting that coach had such an impact. I mean, it was, 60 years ago. It was a long time ago. But you remember that day. In fact, while you're telling that story, I could hear you replaying the video, so to speak, in your head of that coach coming to talk to you about how you were running wind sprints wrong and all that kind of stuff. That made such an impact on you moving forward.
Enormous impact, Mike. And I think back on it. Maybe this didn't pop up right at that time, but I think back on it, and that was the very first time. I was 14 years old. Maybe you're a freshman in high school or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was the very first time I thought, hey, there's a right way to do something and there's an incorrect way to do something. And this guy is telling me the right way. And then all of a sudden, I was mainly a pole vaulter. I started to figure out how to pole vault and how to run hurdles and how to long jump and stuff. So it set the foundation, and I'm still grateful. He passed away some time ago, and he actually was put in the Upstate New York Hall of Fame, and I gave the keynote speech last fall. So it was very, very memorable.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was great.
Wow.
Cliff Lehman, great coach.
Cliff Lehman. That's awesome. I'll have to look him up when we get done here. That's awesome. I love hearing stories of coaches that affect people's lives positively, because there's so many of those. There's no lack of those stories of coaches and their impact with athletes.
Right.
I love that.
Right.
So you mentioned your jumping, your pole vaulting. This we're still in high school, correct?
Right.
Where is the decathlon, the combined events in the world of track and field at that time? Were you looking at heroes in that manner, or was it still just the individual sprinter or pole vaulter?
Nah, maybe the first hero I don't know if he was a hero, but first time I really got emotionally involved was Billy Mills running the last 100 meters.
Oh, yeah.
And it might have been one of the first Olympics on TV. And I don't think it was even Jim McKay at that point. It was maybe another announcer. And he just kept yelling, "Here comes Mills, here comes Mills." And he just went by Gamoudi, and he went by Ron Clark, the world record holder, and he wins the gold for the first time for an American. I said, holy cow, this is big time. And so I got fired up with that. And I was just figuring out my junior year how to pole vault on steel. And that's what we were using back then.
Yeah, I was going to get to that and ask what the pole actually was.
Yeah, we weren't. Fiberglass had started, but maybe out on the West Coast they were using that, and we were still, and maybe we didn't have the budget. We were still using steel. And then all of a sudden that summer, Mike, I said, everybody's going to go to fiberglass. I better learn how to do that. Otherwise, your senior year, you don't want to be left behind. You want to have a good year. So I went. Upstate New York was pretty good in the summer. They had these little all-comer meets at all these little towns, Elmira, Poughkeepsie, Cazenovia, and I get in my car, and sometimes my high school coach, Cliff, would take all of us and put them in his car, and he'd take us to these meets in the summer. And I would take my little Super 8 camera. I'd be the first guy out trying this new fiberglass pole. I didn't know what I was doing. But I would video all the college kids. We competed against college kids then in the all-comers meets. And then I'd come home and get my film processed, and I'd look at it, and I figured it out. And learned from those guys as to how to bend the pole and how to move through the takeoff and all that stuff. And, so it was exciting. That was exciting times.
Yeah. That's a great example of how lucky we are in today's world. You talk about getting your Super 8 out, recording these athletes, having to come back, get it developed, got to put it in the machine to play. That's measured in weeks sometimes. And now within milliseconds, I can have video of the greatest in the world doing whatever event I want to see them doing.
What's interesting, and I still get a nervous twinge every time I look at video. As you get to the end of the video, a high jump or a throw or a pole vault or whatever, I always get this nervous twinge thinking that the last frames are going to burn, because that's what happened on the Super 8. So all of a sudden I had a 6-second clip on the Super 8, and I'd be staring at the last frame, and the light bulb would burn the damn picture, and I couldn't see it.
Interesting.
So film was good, but film wasn't near what video is today.
Yeah. Wow. So you take this passion for track and this, I mean, you always had an early passion. If you were out videoing this, I'm assuming not everybody, not even a lot of people were filming and breaking it down and reviewing it like you were at that time. Did you, after high school, was college in the next step, or what was right after high school?
I ended up getting in two schools. It was tough to get in colleges at that time, and I was a decent student in high school, but I didn't really apply myself. It was just at that point in my life. So I got in Villanova, which was obviously a great track and field.
Oh, wow.
Great track and field school. And I got in Mount St. Mary's College. Now it's Mount St. Mary's University down in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And Villanova was hot shots. I mean, they were good. And they had a guy named Vince Bizzarro, who was jumping 16.8 at the time. They had a New York City kid that was jumping 15.1, and I'm jumping 13 feet coming out of high school. And back in the 60s. And Mount St. Mary's was a good track and field school, Division II, but a strong track and field program. So I said, hey, if I go to Villanova, I'm sitting on the bench. I'm going to get the time of day. So I went to the Mount, and that too, as I said early on, was the best choice. Jim Deegan was the head coach there, excellent. And as the years went on, when I was there, I was in the infancy of the beginning of the decathlon program at Mount St. Mary's. But Frank Zarnowski was there as an economics professor and the assistant coach. So
really,
I couldn't be in a better spot with Frank Zarnowski. We nicknamed him Zeke, and with Jim Deegan, we nicknamed him Deeg. So with those two guys being your support structure and hosting decathlon meets and involving the athletes in multi events, it was great. It was great.
What is the term when it seems random but it's all positive, like fortuitous or something like that?
Something
like for you to go there, that seemed, what could have happened if you'd have went to Villanova, a great program, obviously, but you go there with Zarnowski. And let's take a couple minutes here. Explain to us Zarnowski and his role in decathlon and what he did, what he meant for the combined events.
Well, there's nobody more knowledgeable as the technical, not the technical so much, but the statistical and the historical aspect of the decathlon. If they asked you or me a question on decathlon, we could say, well, give me a second, I'll go look it up. Frank will tell you right off the top of his head, top of his tongue. He has that much knowledge. And he's been an unbelievable support person for the decathlon. It takes a long time, over 2 days, and sometimes fans in the crowd lose interest. But with his voice specifically there, highlighting what's going on over the course of 10 events, it's made a tremendous impact. He's been phenomenal.
He does a really good job of taking 10 events and really making them one event, bridging each event as it moves along.
You're right. You're exactly right. He's just he's done a phenomenal job, and he got into it by chance. I don't know if you know the story, but he was out at Drake Relays. I'm going to guess was the first NCAA decathlon, 71, maybe something like that.
Around
71. And he's watching the decathlon. He might have had an athlete there in another event, and nobody's announcing it. He walked out on the field, took the microphone, and started announcing it. That's how he.
No way.
Yeah, that's how he got to start.
That is awesome. Yeah. Holy cow. So that's amazing. I love that's the real opportunity strikes and you answered the door. I love it.
Well, if you think of it, the decathlon kids and now heptathlon women have to be really self-starters because you're not going to get excellence in every single event every day out. So you're going to kind of have to leave it alone, move from the high jump where you just didn't have a good practice and go on over and do your 400-meter training. And you can't be crying over spilled milk. You have to go after the thing. So maybe that was Zeke's calling from that point.
Yeah. That's great. I love that. That's an extra little tidbit I didn't even know that we would get into. I love that. Yeah. So you went to the Mount where he's at. That's, again, just that fortuitous. I love that. And you went down there to be a decathlete.
Now, actually, I went down to be a pole vaulter, and a guy named Billy Walsh out of Long Island was a junior. He was seventh or eighth in the national AAU championships in 1968. That I went there in the fall of '65. And in 1968, Billy Walsh was seventh or eighth in the national AAUs in Santa Barbara in the decathlon as a student at the Mount. And so I kind of looked up to, well, I did look up to him. And he was a very good all-around athlete. And he had done a decathlon or two for Mount St. Mary's. Well, the way I really got into it was the fiberglass pole. Back then, Browning made the poles. There was no catapult, sky pole, pacer. There was none of that then. It was Browning arms, the shotgun people, I think. Well, I broke 5 poles my freshman year. And let me tell you, when you broke them, it sounded like a shotgun was going off. And so all of a sudden, I'm getting a little bit spooked that every time I take off the ground, they didn't make those poles really well. They didn't know how to make them back then. That was the early 60s. And one of them stuck in my leg in the University of Delaware one night at a meet. And the coach came over, Deese came over and said, "You all right?" And I said, "I think I need a stitch or two." And he said, "Well, take one more jump before you get scared." I said, "Time out. I'm already scared." I said, "It's way too late for that." So I all of a sudden was spooked a little bit that end of freshman year in the fall. So I started throwing the javelin. I was running on the 4x1. I could long jump a little bit, so I worked on that. And all of a sudden I said, "I'm going to do this decathlon." They don't, poles don't break in the decathlon. And that's how I got going into it. Yeah.
Wow. And what did you rise to any kind of level of success in the decathlon in college?
No, I scored 6,000 something, and we didn't even have it in the conference meet. I didn't qualify for the I don't even know if the NCAA had it in Division II at that time. But I ended up, my personal score, best score ever in the decathlon was 65.33, which Ashton Eaton and Brianne Tyson Eaton in 7 events in a heptathlon scored more.
Hey, that's the measure of a coach. If you can coach someone to be better than you, no matter how good or not good you were, that's positive.
Did it in 7 events. I needed 10 to get that. But anyway, I stayed with it through college. And junior and senior year, I did my first and second decathlon. And then after college, I was teaching in Washington, or Arlington, Virginia, and I ran for Brooks Johnson at Sports International Track Club, which was a great program. Great program.
So before we get there, because I definitely want to talk about Brooks, because I know there's a million stories there. Go back to college. What were you studying, and was coaching in your professional thoughts, or teaching, or what were you thinking about for an actual job? I was an
English and education major at Mount St. Mary's, and I wasn't so much still thinking. I knew I was going to go into teaching. And I said, possibly then maybe I'll coach on the side, but it wasn't really a marker yet. It became a marker, I'll tell you about it here in a second, in Santa Barbara and so on. But I knew I wanted to stay in the sport. And I think it was very important to me. I wanted to stay in the sport and continue after college until I satisfied myself. Not till I made this team or that team or broke a record or something like that, just to satisfy saying, hey, I gave it everything I could, because I knew if I went into coaching as a frustrated athlete, and sometimes, unfortunately, coaches do that. They try to get from their athletes what they didn't get as an athlete. So I stayed in it for a couple of years after college, and then the coaching thing really took hold.
Where you knew you wanted to go into the education as a teacher, were your parents teachers, or where did that come from?
My dad was the upstate New York small little town dentist, and my mom was a emergency room nurse. And they met. Wow. I always had a very strong interest in World War II and the stories, books about World War II, the lead up, the Winds of War. Herman Wouk's books and the miniseries and all that. And then I realized, I don't know, sometime in my late teen years that my mom and dad met during the war. So had they not met, we wouldn't have been, my brothers and sisters and I. So yeah, they were very supportive, and my dad especially on. I remember as a little kid on weekends, he would be spend his late Saturday afternoon going to other dentists and observing them. And I would be tagged along in the car. Well, I didn't like that much. That wasn't that much fun. But it opened up a window later in life saying I leaned a lot on my colleagues that I trusted. Telez, Rick Sloan, Fred Samara. I was always on the phone saying, hey, I got this sticking point with this particular athlete. I'm doing this, and this. What would you do? So that's important in coaching, that you lean on other people, because you could be a pretty good coach and pretty knowledgeable, but you don't know everything. You don't.
Yeah, that's interesting insight about your dad going to observe and learn from other dentists. Because Harry, I've known you now for I don't even know, maybe close to 10 years, I guess, close-ish, through our mutual friend Fred Dixon, my now former boss. He's lucky he got to retire. One of the things that I've always observed on the outside watching you is, you've always coached at such a high level. And then, I got to know you through the Ashton years. And of course, and again, we'll get to Ashton and Bree and that fun in part 3 of this series. But what's amazed me is you coaching at such a high level. And I have seen you repeatedly. I mean, it's a theme for you to always be picking the brain of another coach. I've seen you talk to shot put coaches, vault coaches, and it's funny, they're a lot of times asking you for stuff, but you are always peppering them with questions. Well, how do you do this? Well, why do you do that? How could I use that with my group now? It's a phenomenal skill set. That's interesting. Sounded like has a lot of root with your dad in his professional
It really
life.
did. And there's another quick story I can tell you about that. And that aspect of you as a coach communicating with colleagues is critical. You don't have to take everything that they say, because sometimes it might be a little bit too advanced for the level of kid you're working with, or maybe you're already doing exactly what they say, but you're just not getting your point across. But what you do is you pick and choose out of that and say, ooh, that one might work. And that's how you really analyze video. You can look at video for Usain Bolt sprinting correctly and say, okay, he does this, this, and this, and that's what we'll try to do. But there's nuances there, because your athlete isn't Usain Bolt. He or she might be pretty fast, but you've got to adjust accordingly. I made the Little League team. Here's a quick story. I made the Little League team as an 8-year-old. I should have probably been on the farm team, but pretty good baseball player. My dad was the captain of the baseball team in college and all that, so he taught me baseball first. So first Little League game, I'm playing center field. Guy hits a routine pop fly, no problem. It's standard pop fly. I run over to my right or left, I can't remember, and I catch the ball, but I use the Willie Mays basket catch. And after the game, we're driving home. My dad said, why did you catch the ball that way? We're in the car. I said, well, Willie Mays is my hero. He's the greatest baseball player going. They were the New York Giants then, down in the Polo Grounds. And I said, that's the way Willie catches it? That's the way I'm catching it. And he goes, no. He said, you watch Willie and see what he does, how he gets a jump on the ball, how he reads the ball. But you don't take everything. You always caught the ball with your hand up, and that's, he would hit pop flies to me or something like that. And it didn't make a impression on me then relative to coaching, but it sure as heck did later on in life. And I thought back to that and really had fond memories.
That's interesting. When I coached back in the day, which seems like forever ago now, back then they used to talk about stride rate charts for the 100. And, if you wanted to run 10 flat or 10.1, first step needs to be here, second step. And I never liked that, because I started thinking about two unique sprinters. One is Usain Bolt that you mentioned. And then another one from back in the day is Andre Kaysen, who could not be any further different than Usain Bolt. As tall as Usain was, Andre was short. And both of them ran sub 10. And I'm like, you can't tell me that these guys' strides were anywhere near the same. Why am I trying to coach everybody to this average, stride. So being very specific to what you can and can't do with each athlete, that's interesting.
And your point is well taken right there, because to me, the most important aspect in all of coaching is, and as an athlete too, to be honest with you, is to understand what the event is asking you to do in order to be successful. And that's your that's your bottom line. And then from that, you can take your science and your stride patterns and your arm action and all that stuff. But if you understand what the event is asking you to do, the high jump is asking you to take linear acceleration or horizontal acceleration, and on a dime stop and create vertical component. That's all it's asking you to do. That's all. If you can do that, you'll be successful. But then again, then after that, you have to figure out the process in the aspect.
All right. Which is different from one athlete to the next. Yeah. So you decided, I like your attitude coming out of college of, I don't want to stop doing this until I'm satisfied. So you mentioned you went to Brooks Johnson, and he had a group in, I didn't know, even though he was on the East Coast, did you say he was over in the DC
Brooks
area?
Was, teaching, I think he might have been a history teacher. I'm not sure, history or social studies at St. Albans Prep in Washington, D.C. They had and he was a freshman or sophomore JV football coach, and then obviously the track coach. They had what I called a television screen track. It had 4 corners, and they were sharper than hell. Hold it. You sprint down this one straight away and take a left turn, then you sprint the other one, my ankles were screaming at me after we finished workouts on that thing. 4 turns, and I think it might have been 460 yards or something like that. I don't know. But on that team was Martin McGrady, Edwin Roberts from Trinidad, Jane Burnett, Esther Stroy was Olympian on the 68 team. I mean, there were Larry Shipp, who went on to LSU in great hurdling and so on. And Brooks had a club, and then he even set up an indoor track, a 176-yard indoor track on the Georgetown tennis courts in the winter. So we ran indoor track outdoors on a 176-yard track, and it was great. It was great. Wow. So being with Brooks that one year, I was teaching schools in Arlington. Then we drive over in the afternoon for practice 3 or 4 days a week. It was a great experience.
Now, Brooks is revered for lots of reasons, but specifically coaching track and field. Was he a main impact for you at this point in regards to future coaching?
For a lot of reasons, but one that stands out with all the different mentors that I have, and I can talk about these other guys here in a second. Brooks didn't, he's got a pretty good reputation for being a good sprint hurdle coach or whatever. Brooks knew all the events. Tom Telez, who was a mentor, coached all the events. Jim Bush, who was a mentor, coached all the events. Peyton Jordan, who was a mentor, coached all the events. Sam Adams, who was my coach at UCS when I was at Club West, coached all the events. And that was an underlying importance to me, that these guys didn't know, maybe they had an expertise as a javelin coach or something, but they knew all the events. And right then I understood that, Harry, this decathlon thing you're doing is good. And it's great because you're going to have a great understanding of all the events, because as you well know, Mike, there's interrelationships to those events across the line. So Brooks was very good. Brooks had a little pole vaulter, a little guy. I say little because he was about my height, 5'8", something like that. Peter Chen, who was from American University, jumping 17 feet back then in the 70s. Yeah, it was pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talked about Sam Adams and Brooks and Telez, of course, and it made me think of, one of my big mentors for my coaching career was Boo Schexnader, and it automatically made me think of him. I was like, oh yeah, Boo coaches everything, or he can coach everything. Well, he's known as a jumps coach, of course, but I learned more about how to coach sprints by listening to Boo than I did anybody else. So that interdisciplinarian format
it's
of coaching.
Critical. And the bottom line is, when a young coach is starting out, if he or she can understand and learn and know emphatically, correctly. Sprint mechanics. Sprint mechanics are applied to every single movement pattern in track and field. It's very important. And from that, you can build foundations for all the other events. So, and we can get going on specialization in today's world. It's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, how long were you
just
with
the
Brooks?
1 year, and then by chance, that spring, that first 1970, spring of 70, I guess it was, I went out to this place called Santa Barbara. I had never been to Santa Barbara. And I went out there for a Decathlon meet. And I met some people. I was in the national No, it was the spring of 71. It was the spring of 71. I met some people in the 1970 national championships. I was in that meet in Lake Tahoe, summer of 1970. And they said, come on out to this meet in Santa Barbara. So I did. And I saw the gathering of all the different athletes that were there. And a lot of them were pretty darn good. And they were getting prepared for Munich in 72. I got off the plane coming home after that meet. My wife picked me up at Dulles. We were living just outside of DC. And the first thing I said, and I had no idea that I was going to say this, I said, hey, you want to move? She said, where? I said, Santa Barbara. She goes, is it by the ocean? I said, it's right on the ocean. She goes, let's go.
I'm in.
Packed our car. Daughter was born in June. Packed our car in August, and we were there.
Wow. Now, that's a good segue right there, because you mentioned your wife, and I've had the honor to have dinner with you and her, and she is amazing. I get where you get some of your niceness from, Harry, because she is like one of the nicest people in the whole world.
Thank you.
And I'm always amazed and impressed by spouses of track coaches, because of the profession of track coaching. We're usually all around the world, and like the good example here, you're going from East Coast. Hey, do you want to move to Santa Barbara? So where did you meet her, and was she a track person as well, or how did she
was a
take
PE
to this?
major from Marymount College in Arlington, Virginia, and I met her at Mount St. Mary's at I used to call the dances then on the weekends mixers. So a whole bunch. I think a bus from Marymount might have come up, and I met her at that dance, and she didn't like me at first. We had to work at it. But she was into fencing, PE and fencing. And actually, she always tells a story. It's funny. She was in line as a freshman. She was a year behind me. In line as a freshman in college, and going to sign up for classes, and looked over across the line to one of her friends and said, what are you studying? She goes, he said, I'm going to study or major in physical education. And Madeline said, why? And she goes, there's no math. Madeline moved right into that line.
Hey, that sounds like me. That's how I would have picked my major.
Yeah. That's why she did it. She still has problem balancing the checkbook, but that's okay.
Hey, the goal here is to make you not get in trouble with Madeline. So let's just skip that.
No, it's good.
So you pack up and move literally across the country with a newborn daughter. Holy cow. And land in beautiful Santa Barbara. I mean, come on. There's definitely worse places you could have moved to.
It was an amazing time, and really the culmination, not the culmination, but a very, very extremely important time in my development as a coach, a future coach, came from those years in Santa Barbara. Yes, I had a great high school coach and learned a lot. Yes, I had great college coaches and learned a lot. In Santa Barbara, Bill Toomey, who I met the year before at the Nationals in Tahoe, brought in 17 athletes from 13 different countries. We all got free apartments because the year before, or 2 years before, the kids in the 60s got all riled up and ticked off and burned the bank down in town. So kids weren't going to UCSB at the time. So all these apartments were empty, and Bill knew some of the managers said, have the athletes stay in them and nobody will come in and break the windows and stuff like that. So 17 athletes, Mike, from 13 different countries. It was always Decathlon guys. And
Wow.
there were always a great shot putter. Somebody was a great high jumper. Somebody was a great hurdler, pole vaulter.
Right.
It was like an education beyond your wildest imaginations, day in and day out. And out of that group, of 17 athletes, Klaus Marek from Germany was there. He became the national coach for Germany and is still involved in the decathlon there. And he became my very good friend when we started the Thorpe Cup together. Hans Rudy Kuntz, along with Fred Dixon from the United States, but Hans Rudy Kuntz was my training partner. Hans Rudy competed in the 68 games. He got injured before Munich, and he became the national coach for Switzerland. Roger Lesbegard just ended up coaching Nafi Thiam to the Olympic gold medal in the heptathlon in Rio. He was there. And I became the USA national coach with Team Visa. So out of that group that Toomey brought us all together are 4 people who are still involved in the sport of multi-events. It was fantastic. Yeah,
Holy
it was fantastic.
Cow. You couldn't have planned that.
And I don't think Bill even knew that. Wow. Bill was just trying to present a great environment in which to train, and to prepare for the games, and he did. Club West, Pete Peterson's came up. Jim Ryan was on that team. Mark Winsenreed was on that team. Jerome Liebenberg, Jerry Van Dyke from Oregon. I mean, it was great. It was a great 2 years.
Wow. What a time and place to be involved in the sport.
It was great, yeah.
Golly. So you're still competing. Are you teaching as well?
I was substitute teaching to make ends meet financially.
Okay.
And
right.
The whole coaching thing started right there on the track in Santa Barbara in the spring of 72. And
So how did it
start? I am frustrated. I cannot throw. I'm 140 pounds. I think I'm a big, strong guy. And this shot put is killing me. And I don't like this shot put. And I'm cursing at it and screaming at it and so on. And I don't know what I'm doing. So I walk up to Jerry Morrow, who was the Canadian national record holder in decathlon. And tremendous athlete, tremendously gifted athlete. And he was a great shot putter. I said, Jerry, tell me about the shot put, will you please? So he starts talking to me, and after about a minute or two, he looked at me and said, you don't understand a word I'm saying, do you? I said, I'm lost on your second word. He said, get your butt back into school, study physiology, study kinesiology, and you'll figure it out. So the second year I was there, I enrolled at UCSB, ended up getting a second degree in physical education, and they were more science oriented. It was called the Department of Ergonomics, or Human Factors, Human Movement. So it was more of the science end, and it gave me a time. And then I met Tom Telez right after that, which he used science to the nth degree in his teaching, simple science.
Right.
And so it started to make more sense at that point. And so right there on the track, and Jerry and I still stay in touch. And I say, you know what? You were my influence because you pushed me in the right direction. I went from UCSB, then I went back to Syracuse and got a master's in physical education with an emphasis in kinesiology. And then I saw all my friends in California that were teaching and coaching. And I said, hey, there's a livelihood here. Teaching, education, coaching, that's what I'm going to do. That's how it worked.
It's amazing when you look back in your life and there's these small forks in the road. And they don't even look like forks when you were there. So when you were talking to the Canadian shot put coach, you could have made a decision when he told you, hey, go learn physiology and then come back. Yeah, you'll get it then. You could have been like, yeah, whatever. I'll stick to the vault and sprinting and things like that I know. But you decided to take the other fork and go back and get those degrees, and look what that's led to.
You're right. You're exactly right. And I think everybody in some aspect of their life has many of those times, and they can look back and say, yeah, I made the right decision, or I should have gone here. But one thing that was important to me, and is still important to me today, and even though I'm not coaching day to day, but working with coaches and helping them, is when an athlete comes to you as a coach and says, hey, Mike, make me I want you to coach me in the high jump. Make me the best high jumper you can. I'm going to be here in school for 4 years, or with you for 4 years after school, or whatever. It's a big responsibility. I look upon that as a big responsibility. And your window for developing that kid is not like developing his mind. If by chance we get through life and don't have Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that, you basically can continue to develop your mind right up to the last breath you take. But physically, your body starts to fail at age 27, 28, 29, something like that. So I wanted to be sure I knew enough and had enough grasp of each event that I was coaching that I would take as few backward steps as possible in that short window. So that was important to me.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned another legend in our sport, Tom Telez. Was he out in California? Is that how you started meeting him during this time? Or
I knew
how
of
did that
Tom.
connection?
We used to, UCSB was a dirt track at the time when we were training there. So every once in a while we'd go down to UCLA and train there to do some extra end speed work. And they had a great, facility at Drake Stadium and all that. But I met Tom and I knew of him. And I knew he was a great, quote, field events coach in all the events down there. UCLA when Bush was the head coach and then took most of the sprinters and hurdlers and so on. But Tom and I met officially in the winter of 1978 in Florida. John Randolph was the head coach in Florida, and he had coached at William and Mary when I was at Mount St. Mary's, I think. And he called and said, "Hey, I'm having a women's AAU, I think it was at the time, or it might have been TAC, I can't remember, development clinic, and I want you to come down and do the throws. Would you do it?" So I'm coaching up at Springfield College in Massachusetts. It's December, it's snow out the yin yang. I said, "Darn right, I'll come to Florida for a week. I'll come for free. Just get me out of this cold for a week." So anyway, I did, and he called Tom and said, asked Tom to do the jump. So Tom and I were roommates to save money in the same hotel room. And we talked track and field till we were blue in the face. I was like that Cliff Layman moment. I'm standing around Tom Telez, who was revered at that time, already. And here I am, just this young coach. And I said to myself, "Harry, don't say anything stupid, because this guy will come right off your back and right out your eyes." And at the end of that talk, and this is where, at the end of that week of being together, this is where I mentioned early on in this talk of how people have helped me. He said, "Harry," he said, "I'll talk to you anytime because you get it. You get it. You have a lot to learn. You're a young coach yet, but you get it." And basically he was saying how to apply the sciences to the movement patterns. So Tom and I became best of friends. And when I got the job at SF State, Mike, every fall I got on a plane. We didn't have the congresses and the clinics that were going on. I got on a plane, called Tom, and he said, "Come on down." And I just follow him around the whole day, watching him coach, take him to dinner at night. And after I took my notes and say, "Why did you do this with Carl?" Or "Why'd you do this with Leroy?" Or "This guy in the long jump was doing this and you made this adjustment. What was the deal there?" So that's how I learned.
Well, that's a pretty good guy to tag along with.
Great.
Yeah. So I'm noticing a theme of crisscrossing the United States. Went down to the Virginia area for college, and then you go out to Santa Barbara. And then you had mentioned you went back up to Syracuse to get your master's in your Springfield College.
I got my master's at Syracuse, so went back across country, and then a job opened up back at UCSB as half interim director and half-time women's track coach. So in 1975, we started the women's track and field program at UCSB. So I went back to Santa Barbara and took that job. And then after 2 years, Springfield called and said, "We'd like you to be the head coach at Springfield College. We're just starting the women's program here." And so I went back across country to Springfield College.
That's exactly what I talk about with spouses.
Tagging
along with you every time.
Just getting
God
set.
bless her.
My dad used to say, "You guys go across country like you're going down to the corner for a loaf of bread." Jeez. We were all over the place. And then I was really happy at Springfield, really happy. 4 years, we had won two New England championships, and we're second and third the other years. And I wasn't going anywhere. It was good. It was a good place to bring up kids and stuff. And we lost our field house one year because they were knocking it down and going to build a new one. So that winter outdoors, we're trying to coach outdoors in the snow and cold. And I got a phone call from a buddy of mine from Santa Barbara that was now the baseball coach at San Francisco State. And we hadn't talked in a number of years. He was the assistant baseball at Santa Barbara when I was the assistant track. So he said, "Hey, our track coach is leaving. Do you want the job here?" I threw open the blinds. It was the middle of February. I threw open the blinds. It was no says, "Get me the hell out of here." I said, "In a heartbeat, I'll come." So I went out and interviewed and got the job and never left the West Coast.
I like the easy decisions. Hey, do you want to come down to Florida for a week? Yes. Hey, do you want to come to San Francisco? It's February in Massachusetts. Yeah, I'll be there.
Just get me out of here.
And you spent some time. Now, here's where you actually sit down for a while, right? You're at San Francisco State University for a while.
Yeah. It was great.
12 years, yeah. Coaching track, and what else are you doing inside of Team USA and Decathlon development?
Fred Samara was the national coordinator of the Decathlon for TAC, I think it was at the time, and I was their Western regional coordinator for the Decathlon. But our budget was absolutely miserable, like all the other event budgets. We didn't have hardly anything to develop post-collegiate decathletes on. So in the 80s, we had a ton of people, Mike, that were scoring 8,000, 8,100, but that wasn't going to get to the podium. And all of a sudden, people like Bill Toomey and Russ Hodge was a real good friend, and said, "Hey, Harry, what's going on? You guys are in charge of this decathlon, and we don't have anybody that are going to step up and get a medal at the games like we did in the old days." And I told Bill, specifically, I said, "Our budget stinks. It's terrible." And he goes, "I'll get you connected to some people at Visa." He had done some work with the people there. I don't know exactly what kind of work, but whatever. So that's how the whole Visa connection began. Bill got me to the right person. And the funny thing, I lived in San Mateo, and Visa was literally 800 meters up the hill from my house, just up the hill.
And you mentioned 8,000, 8,100 wouldn't get on the podium. What's it taken at that time? What's the world record? What's gold medalist taking?
Well, Daly won in
back then
Moscow
at that point?
in 80 with 8,400. And then he won in 88 with 8,800. And I think third that year might have been Ziggy Vance from West Germany, maybe 8,500. So around 84 to 8,500. And then in 92, we started Visa in 90, April of 1990, and San Francisco State was the first clinic, actually. And, Dan was ready to go, and Dave was ready to go, and Dan ended up no hiding, and Dave broke a metatarsal bone in a high jump leading up to that. So Robert Zmelek from Czech Republic won it.
How critical, if you know anything about the decathlon and its history, the Visa time was a big time for decathlon. How critical was that support from Visa, and then also the support that brought all those people together to increase the
If you ask anyone
abilities?
that question that was involved in that Visa program, or any of the powers to be that were privy to information about that Visa program at that time, then the answer to that question was it was beyond your wildest imagination how important it was. The event was really ready to go south in our country. Since Caitlin had won in 76, we hadn't done anything, nothing. There was nobody getting to the podium or even near it, and that turned the corner. And here's the thing. Here's a statistic that still is a little bit mind-boggling to me, and I still don't quite get a full grasp of it. Visa, our first camp, I had negotiated with them for a year and a half. It took me a year and a half to get everything straightened out. But they really wanted to be on board. And our first camp was in April of that year at SF State. And we brought not only the top 15, 16 athletes and their coaches, but then we handpicked a whole bunch of young kids and got them involved. So Visa money was never an issue. They just said, whatever you need, if you think you can be successful, we'll do it. So that was April. That June, down at Cerritos College, where the national championships in 90, 8 guys scored 8,000 points. 8 guys in a matter of 3 months. But a couple of the athletes, after Visa started sending out the checks, and they weren't big checks, called me and said, I think there's some mistake, Harry. I just got a check for 3,000 bucks from Visa. I said, this can't be right. They're used to getting a $30 check from their per diem or something like that. So it took off. And they had great coaching. We helped pay for the coaches. We supported the athletes, but the way Fred Samara, my best friend, and I set it up was we didn't give the kids a lot, but we put bonuses in. We dangled carrots out there saying, if you guys can get this bonus, make this team, get this PR, break this record, you get this, this, and this. And they took off, and the kids went after it.
Yeah, I'm not sure in today's world Visa gets enough kudos for really blind trust, as you mentioned, from 76 until that time around 90. It's not like they were investing into a group of an event that was doing big things on the national scene. They were really taking a flyer that you and Fred Samara and those guys could bring these athletes up into
you're right.
National prominence.
And in the second meeting that I had a meeting, and he said, John Bennett, who the guy's nickname as the Godfather of Decathlon, great guy. He was the senior vice president in charge of marketing. And in the second meeting, he said, Harry, if we help you, will the guys improve? I said, John, I think so. I said, we just need the finances in order to do this, this, and this. And he said, okay, here's the deal. We're going to help you. We don't know when, we don't know how, we don't know how much. Just keep coming back to me. Every other Tuesday we had a breakfast meeting, and tell me what you think the coaches need, the athletes need to improve. And I did that. Then lo and behold, after about 6 or 8 months, he called one day and says, I got it. We're going to develop a team. And he said, we'll put 3 people on the team. I said, no, we need 10. I said, there's injuries all over the place. I said, somebody got hurt. So they agreed to it. And that's how it went.
All right. Wow, man, that guy's probably one of the bigger impacts specifically for the multis, but in track and field, and maybe most people don't even know his name because we think of the athletes and coaches first.
The kids called him the Godfather of the Decathlon, and John, I still speak to him. He's very high 80s now. He lives back in New Jersey somewhere, and he said, "You know what, Harry? When I look back on my career at Visa, what he did with marketing, he said that was the best thing I ever did." Can you imagine that? It is special. Yeah.
Wow, that's special. Yeah. It's Visa, so he had to have worked with a lot of quote unquote high level, famous, high powered people. For him to say that the decathlon, the Team Visa decathlon was his most cherished time.
And he would come to the meets in Europe, or Thorpe Cups over there. It was called the Visa Cup back then. But I remember we were warming up in St. Louis was the meet in 96. And the Visa Cup or the Thorpe Cup was number 4 through 10 in the United States. The top 3 went to the games and whatever. So the Germans had a strong team, and our guys were a little bit not quite there or something. You just had a sense that maybe they weren't going to compete real well today. And all of a sudden, just before the start of the 100, John had a bad knee at the time, comes limping down the track. Gets off a plane, limping down the track. The guys got fired up. Not only did we kick the putt out of the German team, they broke the world record. And you know who the coach, the honorary coach of that team was? Fred Dixon. Fred Dixon. Fred Dixon.
Oh, no way. Is that right?
Coaches of that team, and they still have the team world record in the decathlon. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And Mike Maynard. Holy cow. That's a good name too. Man. So who were in this visa program during this time while you're also coaching at San Francisco State University, by the way, at the same time, trying to be a father and a husband as well. A lot of roles for you. Who were some of the coaches and athletes? You mentioned some that were in this visa program
Every coach
and their accomplishments during this time.
It worked this way. The kids that we did when we set up the team, John said, set up the team. You and Fred organized this and set it up. And when Fred and I met, we said, we can't pick them. You can't pick the guys. I can't pick the guys. That's politically not correct. So we made a deal. We set it up this way. There's no team. Everybody show up to national championships. The first 10 guys across the line, 1 through 10, you pick yourself to the team. And that's how it was. So it was good. And then automatically, whoever those athletes were, their coaches came on board also. And so Bill Webb was there with the Tennessee kids, with Brophy and Long and what have you. Rick Sloan was there with Dan. Kevin Reed and Terry Franson were there at Azusa with Dave Johnson. Drew Fushi's coach, I can't remember, from Texas Tech was on board. So whatever kids made the team, that's the coaches that we supported also. It was great.
Mm-hmm. That's very akin to the American system of top 3 at trials. You go to Olympics, so top 10, you get to be in the program.
And everybody wanted to be in that program. And that very first camp, Mike, when we had it, and you could see the college kids who couldn't be in the program because they couldn't accept money in college. But they all of a sudden, what Visa did is the Visa program kept the opportunity for kids saying, hey, there's a livelihood here. Even though it's $600-700 a month, it wasn't a lot. There's a livelihood. I can continue to train after I get out of Tennessee or LSU or somewhere. And in today's world, that program doesn't exist in the United States anymore. Unless you get a private sponsor or something like that. So that made a difference.
That's interesting. That reminds me of the story you told about when you were in Santa Monica and you saw other people were making livelihoods as a professional track coach, and you're like, "Oh, okay, I can do this. Like this could be a life, a career
alive,
for me."
And for a long time. And Dan O'Brien, Visa in the final days just before they were going to announce it said, "Harry, you can't say anything until it's officially announced." And Dan O'Brien Dave Johnson was the hotshot at the time. Dan was the up and coming guy, and he kept calling me every couple days saying, "Hey, you told me something's going to happen. What is?" I said, "I can't say anything yet, but just hang on." And he was being pushed by the NFL at that time to be a wide receiver and so on. So, Dan or Dave? Dan. So he hung on, and
is that right?
I kept going back to John at Visa and said, "You got to announce this real quick. We're going to lose this kid. He's going to be pretty good."
Yeah. Well, you called that one. That might not have been your hardest prediction to make.
They were good days. And every one of the prerequisites was that every one of the living gold medal decathletes, John wanted in a full paid position on the team, above and beyond what our budget was. Absolutely. And he said, it will not affect your budget. I'll pay them what it will. Negotiate that with each one of them. Every one of those guys, Bob Mathias, Milt Campbell, Rafer Johnson, Bill Toomey, and Caitlin Jenner were the 5 living gold medalists at the time. They came to every one of our camps. In hindsight, when you talk to the kids that were on the team, that we had 3 major camps a year, they said, mixing with all the athletes and understanding that the other athletes have the same issue in the high jump or javelin or whatever as I do is soul satisfying. And then being able to sit down and talk to the gold medal champions, the heroes, the former heroes, and understand that they put their pants on the same way, one leg at a time. And that was a big deal. So Visa went above and beyond with that.
What you're describing there is, and we haven't used this word yet, but what you're describing there is a culture. So the culture of the athletes being together, being able to feed off of each other on not only their positive events, but their not so positive events. And they're not alone in this world. They're not the only ones who struggle with the high jump or the anti
You
event, the
hit it right on the
1500.
head. You hit it right on the
But
head. As long as the kid knows, I don't care
yeah.
what event he or she is in, that there's a support system there for them afterwards. It could be home support, coaching support, community support, whatever. Then it makes that task that much easier. You've heard people say before, the Olympic Games is a lonely experience. They're not fun. The Olympic Games are not a fun experience. They're a very high-pressured experience. They're a fun experience looking back if you meet your goals, if you achieve and meet your goals. But if a kid look up in the stands and sees, and I remember Ashton in London looked up and he saw one of his college housemates up there, and it just put a big smile on his face. That support system, you really need it.
Oh, yeah. So at the same time, this sounds like it's taken up a lot of time and energy from you. You are coaching at San Francisco State University.
Trying to run the visa program, on a full-time basis and so on. And then late I didn't have any assistant coaches full-time at SF State, part-time people that they would teach a PE class or two and then get a few bucks so they could help coach. So it was a big deal, men and women's team. And I think right after 92, John said, this is John Bennett from Visa. This is going pretty good. Would you like to go full time with the national program? I said, yeah. I said, I'm ready. 13 years. And I used my coaching at SF State the same as what I learned when I went down those years and watched Tom. And I'd be on the track, Mike, at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was my choice. And I did it this way. From 9 to 10:30, the pole vaulters. From 10:30 till noon, the jumpers. From noon to 2, the sprinters, hurdlers, and relays. And then from 2:30 to 4:30, the throwers. And then the fog would roll in San Francisco. And then the distance runners came at 4:30 because they didn't mind the fog. So there was 13 years of coaching from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 every day on the track, which I liked, enjoyed. But at one point, it just got, whoa, I'm pooped.
Well, and it's interesting, you talk to a coach today who is running a program, what you described there, that 9 to call it 5, even though it was longer than that, but being on that track and, you're working with the jumpers and with the sprinters and different events. In today's world of NCAA coaching, there's so much now paperwork and compliance and things like that. I hear it so often from coaches who, they repeat that they got into coaching because they like their quote unquote feet in the sand pit. They like to be outside and they find themselves sitting at their desk at a computer more than not.
I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, the NCAA has so many rules now and what have you that I think if you're a head coach, you're sitting behind a desk more than you are behind a rake in a long jump pit and so on.
Yeah, right. That's a good way of putting it. All right. So you go full time into the Team USA?
With Visa and the Team USA is that if an athlete and his coach were in a good situation, if after they graduated from college, if they could stay there and the coach could, spend adequate time with that person and the person was continuing to improve, we kept them there. If there was a problem and an issue and they needed other support, then they came out to me in San Mateo. So I had an office in Visa for 10 years, and then we trained at both Stanford during Vin Lanana's time there and the College of San Mateo, which had a great facility. Just up the hill. No, I met Vin.
Is that when you got to know Vin for the first time?
When I was at Springfield College in the 70s, he was the coach at Dartmouth up the road in the 70s. And then he came to Stanford just before I came to San Francisco State. Brooks was at Stanford. Brooks was at Stanford when I first got to SF State.
Yeah, Brooks
but then
was at Stanford.
Vin came there. So that's when, we got to know each other a little bit more then. Vin allowed us. Go ahead.
Bunch of
yeah.
I was gonna say a couple of East Coasters out on the West Coast.
I was up in New York, and but Vin allowed us to train at Stanford all those years after we were done with CSM. And as long as we got off the track by noon when the varsity team came out and stuff like that. So it was good. It was good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. It's another theme I'm picking up here is coaches helping other coaches. You had to you needed help from other coaches to be in their facilities and learning from other events. Seems like there's been a pretty good support system throughout your career.
I look back on so many different aspects like that and saying, without that person reaching out and lending a hand and stuff like that, I said, maybe we could have got it done, but it would have been a whole lot tougher. Yeah. And I think it's important to for young coaches to understand that many people would call and say, can I come and watch your practice, or would you talk to me about the 100 or the throwing the shot or something like that? I never hit anything. Sure, come on. And I think it's important to open up like that. And you're not giving away secrets. I could see a football coach not saying, hey, we're not going to tell you what our first 5 plays are, in the game. But track and field, it's a brotherhood. It's like the decathlon and heptathlon. It's a brotherhood and sisterhood. You got to all be in it together.
That's good words. I like that. So when did Team USA?
1990 to 2000. I was
time
full-time
period
92 to 2000. And then it ended,
2000.
and John retired, and Visa moved on, and corporations in general at that point, support-wise, were now starting to give their support more to federations as opposed to individual athletes and individual teams within. So I moved to San Luis Obispo, and I was still coaching. We had a little club down there called the World's Greatest Athlete Decathlon Club, and Tom Pappas stayed in Tennessee, and he was on it. Brian Brophy was his coach, a former decathlete of ours. And Paul Tarek, we brought out from Michigan State, and he came down to San Luis Obispo and ended up he and Pappas ended up making the Olympic team for Athens in 2004. So I was overseeing that. Sheldon Berger, a former athlete of mine, was Paul Tarek's coach at that point. And as I said, Brophy was coaching Pappas along with Bill Webb back in Tennessee. And I was running an after-school physical fitness program for at-risk children. For 9 years for migrant farmers' kids. And it was a good deal because the foundation supported it. And we had fall track and field, spring track and field, but it was really physical fitness around track and field events. And 3 days a week, first grade through sixth grade, I think it was, first through sixth. And then at 2:30, the bell would ring, they'd come out, and at 3:30, they'd get the late bus home for free. So it was a good deal. And I was having fun, enjoying it. And, I would have just kind of liked the Springfield thing. And I got a phone call from Vin, and then the whole thing changed.
Yeah. And we're going to pause there. We're going to pick up. I know everybody listening wants to talk about Ashton and Bree and University of Oregon and world records, but we're gonna tease you a little bit. We're gonna pause. We're not gonna talk about that just yet. But that is a great place.
Sure.
There's some other questions that I have for you, Harry, if you're open for them, as they relate to the decathlon. So 8,000 is kind of that magic point mark. It's the 4-minute mile for the decathlon, right? The 8,000 point. How many 8,000 plus point decathletes you had the honor of working with throughout your career?
I think 6 or 7, something like that. Bart Goodell scored, was my first guy over 8,000 in 1985. I think he scored. No, 86. 1986, he scored 8,000. He ended up with his personal record of 81.09. You know what's impressive, Mike, about 81.09? He didn't have one personal record event in that 81.09. And he was solid, obviously. His PR before that was 8,020, I think. And he went a year later at 81.09. But he was solid and everything. And that kind of was always what my philosophical bent was. Coaching the decathlon, they're not going to be good in a couple events, stink the house out in another one, and then average in the rest. just bring mediocrity up to a high level. So Bart did that. Sheldon Blockberger trained with me, won 82.96, won the multi-stars in England and Italy, the first American to win the multi-stars meet. Brophy won 82.56, I think. Paul Foxon won 82.30 or something out of the University of North Carolina. Chris Wilcox won 8,020 or 30. Paul Tarek won 83.12. We had a good bunch. Yeah.
Wow. Were all these 8,000 point guys that you've worked with, were they all speed and power guys? Or is that what it takes to make 8,000? Or can you do it in, I'm reminded of the kid from, he's not a kid anymore. The guy from Duke University that was a super solid 1,500 meter guy, but was also a great long jumper. Yeah, Curtis. Yeah. He's kind of the different. Everybody else semes to be really good sprinters and jumpers. The Huffins, and Dan O'Briens, and such. Brophy, is that what it takes?
Was a different guy. He won the NCAAs, and actually he had the NCAA meet record at 82 something or other, 82.70 I think it was, until Ash broke it his senior year. But Brophy with a smoking tailwind. Hurricane tailwind would run 11:40. He was slow, and what I always laughed at with Brophy is he would run 11:40 and jumped almost 24:10, 24.9 in a fraction. So, he came out for that, and then we get to the shot put. So he was a power guy in the shot. He'd throw 53.9, 54 feet, pretty good. And he'd beat somebody by 7 or 8 feet in the shot. Somebody else would throw 47 or something like that. And Brophy would come over to me all ticked off and said, Harry, I just laid a whooping on this guy in the shot put, and I still didn't catch up. Because in the shot put, you don't get near the points curve that you do, say, in 100 meters or whatever. So it's good to be fast. You can build from there. Yeah,
it's good to be fast. Yeah, that's the Decathlon slogan right there. that is what's so interesting about the Decathlon is, so you got 10 events which are such varied disciplines of athleticism, but what you talked there about the point differential in the shot put versus other events. What is the number one event or top two events where it's like, oh man, just a little bit of improvement, you get jump in the 100 points, or as an example,
32 points a bar, 32 points a bar. So the bar goes up by 10 centimeters in the vault, and it goes up by 3 centimeters in the high jump. So all of a sudden, an example is Ashton Eaton. When I first got there, he was 13.9. We switched him around to 7 steps. I did that immediately, and he went to 13.3. That's pretty good improvement. Well, then he averaged out. He was running 13.5, 13.6, and stuff like that. It's 10 points a tenth in the hurdles. 10 points a tenth. It's nothing. So, a tenth. Yeah, 10 points a tenth.
You said,
so
hold on. You said a tenth, not 100. A tenth.
And you get X amount of points. 13.30 is 20 more points. So to train to get that amount of time, I'd say just leave it. 13.50 is fine. 13. Let's spend more time in the high jump and go, instead of 2:03, go to 2:10 or something like that, or 2:11. So you play with that a little bit. In the throws, you don't do that. Right. You train to throw as far as you possibly can throw. But unfortunately, shot discus and javelin don't give you the returns that the sprints and jumps do, and so on.
Has anybody ever been a great thrower and also an 8,000 plus point decathlete?
Mike, and here's a great example. Rayford Johnson, gold medal, 1960 Olympic Games. 2 years before that Olympic Games, bad car accident. He can't run. So he says, I got to get in the weight room. I got to do something. So he gets in the weight room and gets stronger. He goes to Rome. His teammate at UCLA, C.K. Yang, all right, they were teammates at UCLA, both coached by Ducky Drake, head coach at UCLA, go to Rome. Rayford beats CK in only 3 events in the 10 events of the Olympic Games: the shot, discus, and javelin, and wins the gold medal. So he stayed close enough in all the others, but he had such big margins in the shot, discus, and javelin that put him over the top. Yeah.
Interesting. It seems like it's less about being a superstar in any one or two events, and more about you said something about rising mediocrity up to a high level, or I'm butchering the way you said it, but it sounds like it's more about what percentage can I get of my PR? If I could operate at 95% of every PR, I'll win. Versus if I'm 110%, so I PR in an event for the decathlon.
Right,
but
right.
Then
you want to try. The goal is you want to try to be
1500 meter
steady.
PR.
You want to try to be steady across the board. And people would ask any coach. They might ask me, "What do you look for in a potential decathlete? What event is the best event to come from?" Or, whatever. I look at it more in a personality. I want somebody fighter. That's a fighter. The fighter doesn't mean just that you're going to take a swing and be a fighter at this moment. You're going to fight every single day, because every day you fail in the decathlon in practice. You never get to the level you want because you're a little bit on the tired side, or it's practice, or, something else is going on. But you have to keep coming back. So I want people that are going to keep fighting. Yeah, take it on the chin, feel rotten, but don't let it affect you. Kick it aside and go on to the next event. So, it's important. And I always set the mantra that we're here to become excellent in all 10 events, and not just 6 of them or 7 of them. 91-26, Kevin Mayer.
And the world record today stands at, and we like to play the game with the 100 and the mile about, well, what is the human stop point? What's the fastest ever a human can run in the 100 and the mile? What's the end game for the decathlon?
I don't really know.
What do you see one day, 50 years from now? What's the world record going to be?
Because of as well as I, the sport of track isn't the glamorous issue it was back in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up, for sure. And I think less and less people are moving into the sport because football, basketball, baseball, or whatever pays so much money. If you're a pretty good athlete, you might go that way. So will it continue to improve because we may be losing these guys to other sports? I don't know. I really don't know. It doesn't surprise me that a European broke Ashton's record as opposed to an American, because in today's world, in America, especially with the money and so on, if somebody's pretty good, they might go to another sport. They might go to football or something like that. Can somebody score 9,500? Absolutely, they can score 9,500. I know they can score 9,500. Beyond that, I don't know.
You answered that one really fast. 95, you don't think is impossible. It's going to happen, is what I'm hearing.
If you can stay healthy and you get a high-level athlete that is really good and a good coach, I think a person can score 9,500.
Well, we certainly didn't think the 100-meter world record would be what it is today. If I'd asked that question 20 years ago, no one would have guessed. They probably would have guessed that maybe at the best 9.6 or something. So, you never know the right combination of person and athleticism. And a big point to what you're saying there is the mentality of that athlete. Yeah. And then a lot of other things coming around it, coaching, support, etc. So I don't want to end before we talk about something that I'd be remiss without mentioning, and you brought it up a couple times in the interview today, is your role in we're talking a lot about decathlon and 8,000 points, but the role of women in combined events. And you've coached some really good women and started something I learned today, several women's collegiate track programs. Talk to me about the women's side of combined events and maybe some of the differences and similarities.
The same kettle of hot water. You're trying to get pretty efficient in 7 events as opposed to 10 for the men, but it's the same deal. Same aches and pains that come up, relative to training, what have you. The women have really picked up the ago, I look back on it, starting, most of the women heptathletes were not very good in the javelin. Most of them were poor. And now all of a sudden, almost all of them, the top level people, are throwing out near 50 meters and so on. They're pretty darn good. You know, you had Jane Frederick in the United States that was throwing the shot and javelin pretty good way back when, but a lot of the other kids. So the women have really made some great inroads in multi events, and maybe it's because of there's more interest there. Maybe it's because of the coaching level. Cliff Rivelto does a great job. Kansas State, and he has for years and years. You know, I think the women are keen to the multi events, just the same reason why a guy might be keen to the decathlon is that, hey, I like to do a lot of different things and I like a challenge. And yeah, I think it's good. The years I spent at Santa Barbara with the women's team and with the women's team at Springfield, and I was the assistant men's at Springfield when I was there, but mainly the head women's coach, it was great. It was great.
So you said a lot of similarities. So it's still nice to be fast.
Helps.
That's still the rule for
good
heptathlon.
To be a good. Well, here's one thing. Here's one thing I think that if you can start the first couple of events in a hep or in a deck, and you're pretty good, you're up near the top. If you're pretty good, and in the hep it would be what, the hurdles and then the high jump, right? So if you can be pretty good in those events, and in the decathlon it'd be the 100 and long jump. All of a sudden, just by human nature, you're putting people in a pressure situation. If you did pretty well and they didn't match up to that, they start pressing. Well, when you play golf and you start pressing, what do? Wham, right into the woods, right? You're driving the ball right into the woods and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's in the heptathlon, I think the hurdles is a key event. The high jump is a key event. They're the two that start you off. And it's human nature. If you start off the day correctly, you don't get out of the wrong side of the bed, right? It can be a pretty good day. You get out of the wrong side of the bed, you start off with two bad ones, it makes it tough.
That's interesting. The talk about the order of events and the psychology there, and maybe just how different the event would be, even if you just switched one event with another.
And it's set up perfectly. And the women's heptathlon went from pentathlon. I think that was the first heptathlon in '84 at the Los Angeles Games.
That would be probably right around when what was it? The AIAW was switching to NCAA. I think it was. Women's sports the women's starting to finally be allowed to be what they are today.
I know the NCAA when they wanted to bring in the decathlon for women, they, in order to make it fit in the schedule when you an NCAA championship meet for over 4 days or whatever it would be, they switched the order all around, and it was atrocious. They never did it. But the high jump was the ninth event. Can you imagine trying to high jump the ninth event? I mean, you kill yourself.
Yeah, personally, I can't imagine high jumping at all. So give me 8 events before that, and no, thank you. And I was gonna ask you your opinions of the women's event moving from 7 to 10. And
well, if they did move, then I would be pro that the order stays the same.
That's
the order
very
has
prevalent.
To stay the same. It's same as the men, exactly. Yeah, same as the men. It's a safety issue.
Yeah, stay the same as the men's.
High jumping, I don't care whether the performance is good, bad, or indifferent. High jumping in number 9, you're going to hurt yourself. Your body is, your body's worn out when you're throwing the javelin. You throw the javelin a whole lot different, whole lot simpler as a decathlete, and Annie really as a heptathlete, because your legs are shot. You can't get down on those puppies as much and really deliver the hip because your legs just aren't working that well, no matter how well conditioned you are. So they'd have to leave it the same. The other aspect on the women go to the decathlon as opposed to the hep, I think I'm out of it now from the day-to-day coaching, but I think it's really up to the athletes. If the females want to move in that direction, go ahead. I think it's fine. It's fine. But if they want to stay with what they're doing, so in effect, I'm saying for the governing bodies, listen to the athletes, listen to what they're saying, and don't have somebody behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room make these decisions. Be sure you communicate with the athletes and the coaches. Can the women do 10? Yeah, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. Should they switch? It's up to them.
Yeah, it's interesting. For sure, they can do it. We've seen some amazing ones, and you mentioned Clifford Velto. Again, just one of those guys that just means the world to me as when I was a track coach, and even now today. He's had some of his athletes do the decathlon and the different exhibitions and meets. I think it's there's hands down. There's no question. Can women do 10-event decathlons? Yes. Point. Period. Done. But the other part that adds up to it is why should they? Different softball is different than baseball. Women's basketball has some different things than men's basketball. Why do they have to do 10? Maybe the 7-eventer is the right event for women's track and field.
From Sweden was really knocking on. I think she scored 7,000.
Yeah,
but
that's
she
what I
was
was
knocking
thinking
on the door potentially to break Jackie Joyner's record of 7290 or something like that. And so there was a little bit of a negative. Don't push the decathlon while Caroline is still doing it. Let's see how far she can go in the HEP. The other issue is meets like Telez at the end of the year in France in September, Gutsis at the beginning of the year in May. If you had the same order of events, they couldn't in 2 days run the men and women together because facilities wouldn't warrant. They would need a third day. Well, it's tough getting people to come to a track meet, fans for 1 day, let alone 2, now 3.
Right.
So I think the powers to be at the international meets, multi-stars, Telez, Gutsis, what have you, maybe we're not in favor of it at the time, but yeah.
Because your major choke points are not even so much for the long jump, but I guess it's more of your throws or major choke points for it. The major choke points on doing men and women,
let's say
10 events that are the same order at the same over 2 days. The major for a facility.
You're on the big D. So how are you going to high jump and pole vault at the same time? Most facilities don't have 2 big Ds. They could probably adjust. Money always comes into play, and
yeah. But good point. I've seen major decathlons that do quote unquote high pit, low pit for the pole vaults, and that still takes forever. Try doing that now with 2 sexes. Yeah, that'd be a long time. Yeah. Well, that seems like a good stopping point for part 1 here, Harry. Let's do maybe just a 30-second preview, a little teaser, if you will, about part 2. So we've been talking to Harry about his coaching career, which honestly, we could do another hour and a half here, Harry. There's so much we didn't even get into with the Giants, and so much. You've had such an amazing career. But now on part 2, we're going to switch over to Harry's coaching philosophy that he has, as you can tell, has been honed by many mentors and just fantastic track coaches from Brooks and Telez and just so many more, Sam Adams, etc. So maybe give us a 30-second preview in 30 seconds, Harry, because I don't want to spoil what we're going to do in part 2 of this. Tell us about the overview of your coaching philosophy that we're going to talk about in part 2.
Coaching track and field has to be based on science, and that doesn't mean the scientist is the end all to how you present teaching a particular event, but it's got to be based on simple science. That's number 1. 2, it is a scientific analysis, but it's also a human analysis. No 2 people are the same. So you have to adapt that to each individual. And it's an art form. Coaching then becomes an art form of blending the science and the human aspect together. And within that, people had asked me to write report on the art of coaching. I came up with 4 letters: PKTC, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Passion, knowledge, trust, and communication. And
that's it.
All right.
Passion, knowledge, trust, and communication. PKTC. It's interesting. I can't wait to talk to you about that, because it feels like, if we go back and think about the hour and a half that we just spoke, I heard a lot of passion, knowledge, trust, and communication woven through your career. So I'm excited to kind of flip the switch and now talk about coaching as it relates to those 4 tenets that you've come up with. So that's part 2. You aren't going to want to miss it. Appreciate you joining us today on part 1. Harry,
good.
Thank you, man. This is so special to me. This has been a lot of fun today. You're awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Harry. And
you
can't
too.
wait to start talking to you about part 2, passion, knowledge. How awesome was that? This guy is legendary, just unbelievable what he has accomplished, what he has done for the sport of track and field, most specifically maybe to the decathlon, but has definitely been a major positive influence over so many people and coaches in this great sport. Certainly hope you received as much value from Harry's interview as I did. Found it extremely interesting when he talked about the influx of support that Visa gave and what it did to kind of explode the decathlon event here in America. So many great people were affected by that. So definitely appreciate what Visa did back then in the 90s. Hey, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for joining us. Your time and attention are super valuable, and we certainly don't take that lightly. We appreciate that you decided to spend it with us today. Want to know when future episodes of the podcast are available? The best way is to subscribe to the podcast in the app you are listening to right now. In the meantime, if this episode of the Gale Athletics Connections podcast provided you value, would you consider sharing it to your network? This way you can provide others with the same value that you received. That's it for today, folks. Join us next episode for part 2 of a 3-part series with Harry Marra. Can't wait to join you for another episode of the Gale Athletics Connections podcast.